Right, so welcome everybody to the second webinar around the book Rebuild that Jack and I have written. The first webinar, we came out of that, both of us feeling enormously excited and thrilled at the depth of conversation that emerged in that meeting. And needless to say, we had our normal set of Zoom issues where things didn't quite work out the way we had expected them to. We have done our best for this one to provide at least the same level of entertainment and hope for the same level of issues to keep everybody smiling and connecting smoothly with each other. Marshall, welcome. The flow for today, we're hoping that today will be even more interactive and dialogue than we were able to do in our first session. And we're expecting today to have even less of Jack and myself talking and even more of everybody talking to everybody in here. So in that sense, the proposal we have, and whether we're actually able to do it or not, by the way, I will be using my background as slides. So when I'm speaking, please do put me into speaker view rather than into tiles views so that you can see clearly whatever I'm pointing at. So the planned flow is that we'll spend about 5 minutes for the intro. So in about a minute now, I'm going to stop talking about that. We're going to spend around about 15 minutes between Jack and myself talking about the case for an all capitals, all stakeholders incorporation and why that's essential. We will then spend another 20 minutes in breakouts, followed by 40 minutes in, or 45 minutes actually in a fishbowl. And I'll say a bit more about how a fishbowl works later for those who don't know it. End up with about 5 minutes of closing thoughts from Jack and myself, and then bring the gathering to an end. So that is the plan for today. Welcome to everybody who has arrived. It's grand to see so many familiar faces, so many new faces, and I see a few faces up there that that I last saw a long time ago, and it's grand to see you all again. So a couple of words from Jack and myself on, most of you have probably already taken a look at the book Rebuild, have maybe even read part of it, and you'll have recognized that one of the central themes of Rebuild is that if we want to rebuild, in particular, if we want to rebuild from the paradigm we have to a completely new paradigm, we need a combination of, on the one hand, we need new lenses so that we can see things differently to the way that we see them now. But secondly, we need new ways of building, new building blocks, new tools to build. And a good example of that from the world of building cathedrals or towers, the Ulm Cathedral was the tallest building that could be built using traditional stone construction methodologies. And it's at 162 meters high. It's almost impossible to go any higher than that. Maybe 170 meters, maybe fractionally above that if you do really careful stone construction. But there's no way that you could ever get to the height of the Eiffel Tower if you try to build it using stone. The only way you can get significantly above the 162 meters of the Ulm Cathedral and get into the 324 meters height of the Eiffel is by looking at construction through a completely new lens and using completely new building blocks to build. And this story is one that nature has learned time and again, that humanity has learned time and again. If you want to build something fundamentally new, you need fundamentally new ways of building. You cannot build the new paradigm using the tools and construction materials of the old paradigm. So the new paradigm that we have coming towards us now is a paradigm of, whether you call it stakeholder capitalism, circular economy, regenerative economy, whatever you call it, it requires a fundamentally new paradigm. Now, in this new paradigm, one absolute is going to continue to be true in this new paradigm, and it's something that has remained true for thousands of years, namely that human nature does not change anywhere near as fast as the technology we have to do things with changes. There's relatively little difference between how individual humans and groups of humans react, in particular how we react under times of stress and change, to the 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. So any approach that requires all human beings to have the same values, that there are no people who are acting purely in their self-interest, no narcissists, etc., in the mix, any approach like that is fragile. And the best we've found across centuries, millennia of civilization, to enable something stable to emerge, given that human beings are what they are, is summarized in that top line. The idea that there's no taxation without representation. If you're going to tax the citizens of a country, they need to be engaged in governance. And what that means is that to have something stable across the huge diversity of different needs, human natures, etc., we need to balance power, both the power to and the power over. We need to be completely inclusive of all concepts of value, all kinds of values, and all kinds of needs. And we need to do that in a way that is fully aligned. In particular, in the world of business, it means we need to align all of culture, structures, processes towards the kind of outcomes we want. So if we want to build stakeholder capitalism, if we want to build a circular economy, a regenerative economy, a well-being economy, any of these, we need to build it in ways that are anti-fragile. In other words, they work with human nature as it is, full of tension, conflict, and all of the other aspects of human nature that we know so well. And they derive their strength, their adaptability from human nature as it is, without any attempt to, or any assumption that it will work when human beings all think in a certain way, all have a certain set of values, all behave in a certain way. So that has led us to what we have looked at as, how do you incorporate to enable that to happen? And we've fixed at the incorporation level, at least in what we're discussing here, because it's in the incorporation of a company that you have something that is the first layer, that is big enough to include all of the stakeholders, and yet, and in that sense, it's a microcosm of the entire economy. At the same time, it's small enough to actually work with, and it's the building unit that the rest of the economy is built out of. So if we get incorporation right for human nature as it is, and right in that it's inherently able to deliver stakeholder capitalism, a wellness economy, a circular economy, a regenerative economy, etc., there are certain key characteristics that we believe need to be true. The first one is that it should include in the power structures, in the governance of the company, all of the stakeholders that are engaged and all of the capitals that are engaged. Only then are you able to ensure that no stakeholder group can dominate over another stakeholder group. In other words, a group of people or nature is not a viable stakeholder unless they have the power to protect themselves and the power to get things done that needs to be done from their perspective. Such a company also needs to grow all of the capitals, including financial capital. In everything I'm saying, there's a tendency sometimes to hear what I'm saying as being antagonistic towards financial capital. Financial capital is a core building block of what we're doing. It represents part of what we need in the kind of economy that will build houses, manufacture clothes, furniture, things like that. Thirdly, this kind of incorporation needs to scale. In other words, the company itself must be a viable stakeholder at the next level of scale. And that means that the company must be free, in particular, free of being treated as the property of one or more stakeholder groups. And any incorporation that is treated as if it is property is fragile if we want to build any of these kinds of economies. The decision perspective needs to span from now through to centuries in the future, not just the next quarter. And if we get all of that right, it needs to be one that will naturally form ecosystems and circles. So that's a bit of an intro from me. Jack, would you like to bring in a few thoughts at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just like to begin with just to welcome everybody. It's really, really nice to visit with you all. And this particular moment this is something of a jubilation. It's very, very emotional. This is, it's something that we worked very, very arduously. We put together a lot of work for over a number of years, and it's good to see the fruition of our work. And it's good to be able to share this with all of you. And I just want to say welcome. And it's very, very exciting. And it's also very humbling just to get this to be with you right now. I really like what Graham put together. I think it gives us the succinct encapsulation of what we would like to do and the essence of our book. And I would just like to emphasize that it's our overall goal is to get from A to B. And right now, A is not working. It's only working for maybe just a couple people or a couple groups. And B, as we envision, will be much more provisioning for everyone. But the difficulty is from getting from A to B. And even though we mentioned the beneficial aspects of B, we also devote a lot of the book to looking at the obstacles and the way that we can surmount these obstacles. And I think the way we wrote the book, it gives us a very, very meticulous recipe for self-developing and in ways that we can recognize the obstacles that are out there and then also be provisioning for all of us. And we also have to remember, when you look at the economic system that's out there, this is an economic system that doesn't just rain down from the above. This is something that all of us do create. And maybe the lenses and the stories that we've been used to does not give us that advantage that this is all of ours. And we need to ask, what is it that we want? What is it that we're not getting? And we also have to realize that every one of us is interconnected with each other. And this is the essence of the notion of the stakeholder system. As a business, as an economic system, we do have to recognize that there's the existence of stakeholders, and everyone is relevant. And let me just give an example of when both of us were done with the book. We were in South Africa, and we were relaxing on a deck looking at what I think is one of the most beautiful mountain ranges anywhere. And we began writing the acknowledgements. And this was exciting, but it was also difficult. And the essence of this was we were basically saying to the world, our book, there's a lot of stakeholders in the book. It wasn't just us writing, even though we're the authors, but I was influenced by lots of people. I will be influenced by lots of people, as was Graham. And we recognize this, that this entity, which is this fruition of years of work, it is produced by a multiple of stakeholders. And I think we recognize that. And looking at our economic system, I think this is what is missing. If you look in the dictionary definition of capitalism, you basically read something like this. Capitalism is a system where the means of production are owned by individuals or businesses in order to maximize profit. But what they mean by this is it is a narrow focus, looking at only financial capital and ignoring the other capitals. And what we need to do is to recognize that in each entity, whether it's writing a book, whether it's raising a family, whether it's running a business or an economic system, there are multiple stakeholders. And I think that's maybe the main provision of our book, is recognizing this and putting together a recipe that engages all of us. It is very, very critical. The existing system does not work. And I think that should be obvious. I mean, it is obvious with me in the US that our nation is a mess right now. We need something different. And one of the reasons why it isn't working is the exclusion of all stakeholders. And this is something that I think is absolutely necessary as we do move forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. Right. In a few moments' time, we're going to separate out into breakout groups. And after the breakout group, when we come back, we're going to use the fishbowl process. So for those who don't know the fishbowl, and I'll repeat this afterwards, the central idea is each breakout group select a representative who will enter the fishbowl. The people in the fishbowl have the talking piece and can speak. Everybody else is around the fishbowl looking in at them and listening. And if anybody who is on the outside wants to step into the fishbowl, virtually tap the person from your group who's in the fishbowl on the shoulder, agree that the two of you swap, and you step into the fishbowl. This is a way of enabling a large number of people to be engaged in conversation, but where the conversation scales from very small intimate through to the full group, but keeps the quality of intimacy and exchange. So that's the process that we'll be using. Assume we can get the breakout groups to work properly this time around. We have an advantage in that I'm not going to try and do the breakout groups myself. In the breakout groups, I suggest the following guiding themes. In light of what Jack and I have been saying, what are the problems, what are the fragilities you've experienced or foresee as we try to move to business and an economy that is fundamentally good for the triple bottom line? How might these be caused by mono-capital or mono-stakeholder incorporations? What might be different if we have an all capitals, all stakeholder incorporation? And the final bit, what benefits could this offer that would be compelling to traditional investors, traditional entrepreneurs, traditional business leaders? The people of us who are in this call, we all get what we're talking about. So the big question to make the change that we need to make is what will attract in the next layer and the layer after that. So any questions before we dive into a breakout group?
Actually, I like this. My ex-wife always said that I look like a fish. So this might be nice for me.
That might be a good
I don't think that was a nice thing for her to say, but I think she was other people have said that, so I'm anxious to be in a fishbowl.
We will play with it and see what happens. Great. Any clarifying questions? I see none. And to John, yes, this is now moving into a conversation about how to build stakeholder capitalism, given that standard ways of incorporating, like the cooperative, like the limited company, are fragile. If we try to build stakeholder capitalism using those ways of incorporating, that we actually need to incorporate in ways that include all stakeholders in governance, all stakeholders in wealth sharing.
Do you think we need a definition of a stakeholder? I mean, we know what it is, but would that be beneficial? Maybe just to give a. I mean, it's a very, very simple definition. It's just stakeholder is an entity with an interest in the existence of another entity. Now, what do we mean by interest? That's a little bit amorphous, but that's the essence of a stakeholder. And something else about stakeholders is that, maybe traditional from 19th century way of economic thinking is that the boundaries are rigid. I'm a stakeholder in this aspect, but I'm very, very different from another stakeholder. But the way we look at stakeholders, the boundaries are very, very amorphous and they're fluid. One could go into another. And I think that's also very, very crucial is that, maybe the traditional, your mother's way of thinking of a stakeholder might be different with the way that we're looking at it. We have this notion of fluidity and the amorphous boundaries.
Daniel.
I have a question of curiosity. If anyone here has read a fairly new book by Yanis Varoufakis, which is called Another Now. If you're familiar with this.
I have not read his most recent. Oh, I have not read his most recent book, but I've read just about all of his others.
And because for me, I'm reading this and I'm also reading Rebuild at the same time. And it is Another Now is a novel, but it is a novel set in 2025, where it's basically they find someone living in this now finds a wormhole to communicate with another now, which was split after 2008, and talking with their alter egos. And it's a very interesting thing. And it's, I mean, basically, the things you described, they are kind of, yeah, it's I really recommend it as a addition to Rebuild to see how fictionally it could be in Another Now.
That's interesting. I will have to take a look at it because, as I mentioned, I've read all his other books.
Okay, so let us kick off in the fishbowl with Trey. Do we have all of the groups, by the way, represented? If any group is not represented, please right. Okay, hopefully everybody's up there. So let's kick off with Trey, and then we'll go to Marshall after Trey. Trey.
So thank you so much, Graham. it was an amazing, lovely conversation. Members of my group were Daniel, Jeremy, Eva, Sophie, Alexandra, and myself. And when we began talking, immediately what came up was the idea of, in terms of problems, psychological safety. The thought that what we perceive as certain, what we perceive as uncertain, really is at the root of whatever it is that we're talking about here. And another problem that we were perceiving was previously fixed mindsets, particularly around the arena of Wall Street and speculation. And that perhaps peeling back the assumptions of what those are all about might be in order. Another one that came up was the idea of stakeholder, just even the word stakeholder, that it's problematic because it means a stake in the ground. It's something to protect, it's territory. There's a sense of competition that comes from it. And another one was the idea of outcomes and our fixation with outcomes measurement, that there's this idea that we can actually even predict those outcomes and that we have control over those outcomes, when really we don't have control. We can influence them, and we can influence them by the inputs or the conditions with which we engage, but it's really, outcomes are more emergent, and we perhaps looking at those might be a little bit more life affirming. When it comes to what might be different, there were some interesting things that came up that were more along the lines of how the brain works to learn, how brain science factors in, and how we actually learn as human beings. And we thought that maybe a focus on pathways of how humans engage more than projects or programs, and that human engagement is central. And one of the key things that Daniel brought up was this idea that as human beings, we tend to want to shortcut. So when we look at the what would you call it? When we look at your graph, for example, the tendency is, well, if I'm here, I want to be there, so I'm going to just jump to there. When in reality, the there is a cumulative culmination of the experiences of the other phases, and that having those experiences are crucial. That that really finding a way to make the journey compelling, that the journey itself is what is compelling, not getting to the end result. And perhaps, and we only just barely touched on this and then we ran out of time, is that what might be compelling is that there seems to be this tendency to react when changes are happening, to fall back to the things that we know. Well, we need to do this, so we're going to do this because this is what's worked in the past, when really it hasn't worked. It's just a perception that it's worked. And if we might use that journey or engage in that journey as a way to handle the changes, understanding that we can be the change, that we can help move that change forward, that it's not something that happens to us, but something that we choose to enter into. And that was as far as we got as a group. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Trey. In a moment, Marshall, but just before Marshall comes in, I want to pick up on psychological safety. That's one of the big themes of the book Rebuild. And one of the big insights for me 10 years ago was that the standard incorporation cannot deliver robust psychological safety, no matter what the culture or the values or the leadership process is. And I think it's imperative, if we're going to have stakeholder capitalism, that we have psychological safety, which then leads on Marshall. what would you like to bring into the fishbowl?
Perfect. So thank you. Members that I was working with involved are Anna, Nelson, Filippo, and Christian. Our main discussion focus around the actual nitty-gritty of the power, governance, and economics. So questions that we were discussing is, as far as percentages, like very detailed, which is of course not easy, but the percentages of governance, ownership, how much money, how much persons gain, how does that actually work with people that are ready to incorporate in different parts of the world, that you don't have to convince them, they want to do it, but maybe the formula as far as the percentages, how does that look like? There was also a point in discussion that how does that work with in the environment as a capital within companies, who speaks for the environment? And also there was a point mentioned that there was I think that was, Christian mentioned it in our group, that there was an experimentation of having different stakeholders, and one of the biggest problems was that a lack of knowledge of information, which led to creating conflict or crisis. So those are just some of the things that we discussed.
Excellent. And that is a big one, this lack of knowledge and information. For the FairShares Commons to work, it is critical that all stakeholders get adequately informed and trained. At the moment, investors have an unfair advantage because they're the ones who get informed and trained, and business has a legal accountability to do so. Good. Who would like to pick up next?
I can go.
Go for it, Jack.
You had to forgive me. I did not take a roll call of our group participants. So if the group participants, if they would like to waive or volunteer their names, just go right ahead. Like each of us, I think our conversation, I think, was very, very rudimentary, but it was very, very enlightening. And let me just mention something that one of the other participants, I think was Marshall, mentioned. And I remember when we were writing at the very early stage of the book, and I said to Graham, we had a long conversation over this, should we be using the words that have been traditionally used? Or maybe should we be inventing a different language? And we did make the decision to use the traditional words. And one major reason was looking at what Einstein did, which revolutionized physics. He basically used a lot of the definitions and a lot of the words that Newton used, but he used these in a different way. And I mentioned that, given that the remark about stakeholders. Yes, this is very, very 19th century, 18th century even. It goes way, way back to ancient civilizations where you literally stick a stake in the ground. This is mine. But that's not the definition that we're looking at. We're looking at something that's more fluid, that's more equal, that's more democratic, and that's more amorphous. And I think this is also very, very crucial when we look at the words investors. When we look at the word stakeholder, we're looking at words that have been used going back to the 19th century. But it's very, very critical that the values that we're learning, our journey, needs to give a new lens and a new meaning making to these definitions. Now, about our group, we had a lot of good, just a lot of good contributions. And I guess the only difficulty is that we ran out of minutes. One of them was, when we look at the questions, we only see the word investor there. There's an absence of other stakeholders, and we're wondering why that is. And it's something, as we want to go from A to B. Maybe the biggest obstacle is most of us right now are asking, what's in it for me? what can I do? What will this do, to make my position better? And this almost this myopic notion that there needs to be something in it for me that I could participate. And the system is failing. What can we do so all of us will benefit? And we also looked at the initial problems, and I think it's like other groups mentioned, that the essence of the traditional problems is the using the traditional values and our traditional definitions without looking and asking, what else can we do? And we also focused, on the meaning of the traditional investor and what does that mean? And anybody else in the group that would like to add? I was not a good group prep. I wasn't taking assiduous notes, so forgive me if I missed anything. And if I did miss anything, just anybody can add.
Great, thanks, Jack. Let's move on to, I would suggest, perhaps Perry next, then Nicholas, and then John.
I was in a group with Eileen, with Jenny, with Robert, and with Telu. We didn't do anything of what we've been asked to do.
Yay!
Most of us didn't really understand the FairShares Commons models. We spent most of the time listening to Telu and to Robert, explaining the basics of it. Eileen asked about how relationships were built between stakeholders. Jenny asked how investors withdrew their investment. And I was left with Telu's notion of spiritual capital, something I would like to understand better. Now, I only put my hand up to show you how to do it. So I'd be delighted to be chucked out of this role by anybody else in my group.
Well, everybody will have a chance to engage in a moment, but I see waving hands, so people are probably pleased with that. By the way, I love the questions that came up. Those are central themes of the entire book. And that bit about spiritual capital, my declared faith is atheism, and I fully acknowledge that atheism is a faith. At least that's my perspective of atheism. But in the UK, I was part of a group called Spirit at Work for a number of years, which was all about how, spirituality, whatever place you're coming from, wherever you look across the planet, is part of human society. So it's something that needs to have a place, but it needs to be inclusive. And so I think all of these questions that you were posing, Perry, come back to the central point of how can we incorporate businesses that are fully inclusive of people of all faiths and none, people of all perspectives and none. Whatever the diversity may be, we need a way of incorporating that is fully inclusive, and where no one paradigm has power over another paradigm, no one paradigm has the power to do to another paradigm against their will. And so long as we incorporate in ways that structurally embed power imbalances, we cannot build a stakeholder economy. And even the cooperative, that has the power paradigm of the opinion with the most people behind it wins, which is not always the best choice for the future or for the organization. So I think I said, after Perry, I said Nicholas next and then John. Nicholas.
Hi, Graham, thanks. We addressed the question of who was going to represent the group. We didn't answer it, but since I asked the question, I'm taking the lead on this.
Well done. Thank you, Nicholas.
So the three main problems or issues that were raised by the group were the time, first of all, the time invested into work. Loads of time too much time for no real added value. Second issue was the lack of synergy and symbiotic state within organization. And the third problem was the lack of connection between people as a result, or as an origin, the cause, to be honest. And the causes facing those three issues were first the fact that companies were owned by some people, and those people were often focused on value capturing, so just revenues, incomes, instead of value creation. Second thing was the second factor was cause was the industrial traditional approach of organizations, just producing and generating the most you can. That was generating, of course, silos and accordingly the lack of synergy and symbiotic state. And then the third cause was the lack of connecting culture, often created from the top. So top down instead of bottom up, instead of being co-defined by people and then connecting them. And how could we change this? That was the third question. We didn't get so far, but I would say we started discussing it. And as Sebastian was saying, just having a conversation around baseball can connect two persons, just a professor, a teacher, and his pupil. So connecting people and empowering them is the purpose, and organizations must actually be structured and organized to serve that purpose. And it will make the common project much more resilient while facing adversity, whatever it may be.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicholas. And John.
So we had Gareth, Paolo, Cecil, and Marius in our group. And again, like Nicholas, we didn't appoint a leader. So unfortunately, I'm doing that. I have a tendency to be a bit gobby. So that was one of the issues, that I was a bit gobby during the thing. But what kind of things came up? Several of us talked about the inequality that we see today, financial inequality, educational inequality. Paolo highlighted the enormous difference in earnings between certain people, like a chief exec getting 30 million euros and an employee getting 30,000 euros, and how can everybody have the same views when people are earning such different amounts of money. Cecil talked about autocratic decision making, and particularly witnessed during COVID of how people at the very top can just suddenly change their mind. And we know why they have to, but it's super duper frustrating for people throughout the organization because it doesn't get buy-in. And then Gareth and I were both coming at it from a perspective of how can we make change here? Gareth from the kind of startup perspective, how can he nurture startups to create themselves and work in a different way? And me from the kind of leadership and management tools, and how can we empower people to lead organizations in different ways. And Gareth put in this great idea about the dragon tamer, the whole concept of how can we come alongside an enormous, great big organization. And I guess, you know, we're talking now about question 3 and question 4, how would an all capital organization fix these things? How would it be compelling for investors? How can we come alongside big organizations and society generally and begin to provide reasons for them to listen to a new way? A couple of analogies came up. One was changing both engines whilst we're flying along. You know, we can't, even though we've seen during COVID that the world can stop very occasionally, even so, it hasn't stopped, has it? The world hasn't stopped. It's still going, even though it's had a great opportunity to stop it. And then the other analogy that was flagged was the whole kind of French Revolution side of things. How do we fundamentally challenge and change without steamrolling the whole, you know, the current society? And we didn't come up with a solution, but we did begin to come up with a conversation piece before the time was out, which was around, if we could, to use Gareth's phrase, be dragon tamers, if we could come alongside existing organizations and seek to provide an open access form by which those organizations could all begin to transform and could all see the value of being able to transform. And if that power of transformation, Graham, was placed in the hands of the people rather than placed in the hands of government or board directors, then what might happen would be a capital-driven survival of the fittest, where the people wanted to transform and they knew how to do it because they've been empowered how to do it free of charge. And the people decided which companies they wanted to invest in as crowdfunding, which companies they wanted to spend their money with. And a survival of the fittest kicks off, where those who resist this transformation method and this involvement of all the stakeholders, eventually they either die out or they become less strong as those organizations that embrace a kind of cultural wide empowerment of rich and poor, educated and uneducated, what's the word? Already empowered and not yet empowered. Yeah, so some methodology of, and we ended up, or I pinged in an idea about if we could focus on the acceleration of organizations and empower the people to accelerate organizations, then might that change, might that then be a real influencing thing that would provide fluidity and would affect the performance of all of these global organizations? Because the reality is, how do we find a way to actually begin as a growing tsunami? You know, a tsunami is simply molecules of water, isn't it? But it's a chunk of them all at the same time, all, you know, suddenly flowing over something. So it was that question about how could we commence that?
Thank you for that, John. And I promise I didn't pay him to say what he said, and I didn't deliberately choose him to go last, but that's a perfect segue.
I did.
Ah, thank you, Jack. Yeah, in terms of enabling, that's exactly what the FairShares Commons does as an incorporation. It, from front to back, it enables all of the people who are involved in a business and even in an ecosystem of businesses to truly be able to step up and do what needs doing. And at the heart of that is the fact that, as was said a bit earlier, if there is no psychological safety, there is no empowerment in any situation where somebody else has control over you, where somebody else owns you. And the issue with almost all forms of incorporation is that they are treated as if they were the property of the owners, whether it's the financial investors, the members of the cooperative or whatever, where those owners can do what they want with the company. And that means all of the other stakeholders engaged with it are disempowered systemically. You know, and yes, you might have an enlightened investor behind it, and you think you're empowered, but as soon as something changes and that investor sells their shares, you may be disempowered or whatever. So that's at the heart of what the FairShares Commons is there to do. And our accelerator is there to accelerate it. Part of the design intent with FairShares Commons, by the way, is that, and what we're working on with our startup university and accelerator, is that existing multinationals, large companies that could never get approval from their shareholders to change, could invest in ecosystems of FairShares Commons companies. And as this ecosystem of companies becomes more successful and grows, so it can, in a sense, take over, as you were saying, John, through the competition. And there's no loss there because the investors in the multinational still get their return on investment at the same time as the transformation happens. So you have this classic transition between two S-curves as the old paradigm is dying and the new paradigm is being born, or the FairShares Commons building a fluid bridge from the one paradigm to the other. It meets the needs of the old paradigm at the same time as it transforms into the new paradigm. So those are some of the core elements in there. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, decision. The FairShares Commons is not just a structure, it's also a whole bunch of processes. So for example, decision-making in a general meeting is not by brute force voting, unless there's complete process breakdown and you have to take a decision. Decision-making is through consent decision-making. Those who've seen sociocracy or holacracy or the Quaker methodologies, etc., it's in a decision gets passed if there's no reason why the decision is too dangerous to take, not necessarily because everybody agrees, which is consensus, nor because the most powerful person says do it. And at the heart of the FairShares Commons are also the key principles of Elinor Ostrom's Commons. Things like take into account the needs of the next 7 generations when you take a decision, not just your needs now. So we have another 6 or 7 minutes before we should head into wrapping up. After we wrap up, I'll certainly be in here for a while longer to continue discussion, as we would if this was a real conversation face-to-face, where we would probably head off to a cafe or a pub afterwards. What I would encourage, a couple of people have already started up or are planning to start up reading groups. So if anybody wants to stay in contact with other people in this community, please put your emails and contact details into the chat window. I will email to all of the participants or everybody who registered on Eventbrite the emails that show up there, or whatever shows up in the chat window. And if you want to form a reading group, put a comment in there that you would like to form a reading group, and please contact me if other people want to form a reading group. Quite a few people have said to me that the book becomes so much easier to put into practice when you're in a reading group with other people. So any other comments, questions, input from anybody that you want to bring in at this point?
Well, let me mention something, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Jack.
And then I don't like to monopolize, but I think I do owe the other people that were participants in the group, just to mention the name, just for the record, it was Nicholas, Aileen, John, and Michael. And all of us, I think we really worked well together. And also let me mention that this is officially a book launch. I view this as something much, much different and much broader. It is a launch of friendship, and it's really nice to meet a lot of you. It's a conversation launch. It's an ideas launch. And as Graham mentioned, it could be a book reading launch. It isn't the end, it's the beginning. And just as they, it's a beginning of, I think, just a long relationship with all of us, working on ideas. And then that's it for me. Well, I do have to leave right at the half hour. I'm teaching.
Yes, Jack has a bunch of university students to give a lecture to.
So I will be leaving abruptly at half past the hour.
So I would love to hear from somebody else. John, your hand went up.
Yeah, I think I'm building on what Jack put through for us, and also I think quite a number of the other contributors. It feels to me like I'm kind of trying to boil it down to it. It feels to me like I want to try and find something that's as gratifying as money for people, because at the moment, this is maybe talking about Gareth, I think he's left, but he was talking about getting a dragon alongside the dragon. But it almost feels like there's a lot of focus on how the system's failing, but that's not very gratifying for people to look at. It feels to me like if you really want to get alongside a dragon, you've got to kind of end up having got to at least look a little bit like a dragon. And it feels to me like trying to find something as gratifying, whatever it is that is gratifying for me. I mean, I think the hippies had it, actually, to be honest with you. It's all peace, love, and understanding. And that looked better than money. And I think in some ways, I'm not a hippie myself, but it's something like that at the moment. It feels to me like there's a lot of focus on the story of how things are going wrong, and that doesn't necessarily pull people into the story. And that's the bit that I'm trying to work on at the moment, is trying to understand that. So yeah, that's it.
Very true. Thank you, John. Anna, I saw, I think, a hand up from you.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. And just responding to you, John, I mean, I think this is something where I feel the multi-stakeholders and the multi-form of capitals actually give you quite a lot of freedom to design things where there are different sorts of capitals and different sorts of relationships being exchanged that wouldn't otherwise happen. So it's not that you're trying to make everybody find something that's as gratifying as money, but it recognizes, well, this is where this stakeholder group is now, or this stakeholder is now, and that is what would be useful to them now. And I think, I hope, I believe that this is a way that is going to really release human creativity and innovativeness to find and create new solutions that we haven't previously been able to think of. So
yes, I'll pick up on that briefly. As I was developing the FairShares Commons incorporation 10 years ago now, one of my overarching design briefs to myself was to accept human nature is what it is, that value judgments of good or bad, or good or evil, are actually at least unhelpful. Nature needs parasites, it needs predators to stay healthy, to function. And so, as you've been saying, one of the big ideas of the FairShares Commons is precisely that it looks like what you're used to looking at from at least one perspective. So if you are somebody who's purely interested in money, and I'm getting better and better at speaking this language, the FairShares Commons look like something that will give the return on investment you need. And if you're somebody who's used to working in impact in organizations or social enterprises, the FairShares Commons looks like that from that perspective. And I totally reject the idea that we can build something that only has one perspective, just as none of us would walk well if we only had one leg. We need the opposition of the two legs to be able to walk. Good. Daniel, did I see your hand going up? Yes, if you could put in some last thoughts from yourself, and then we will formally wrap it up.
There were definitely people before me, so I would leave it up to some of the other raised hands here.
Right, if there's another raised hand that wants to go.
Marshall was for sure before me.
Not seeing one. Daniel, take your chance. I'm not seeing any strong takers.
So this is just to riff on John's comment of hippies and this good and bad, the dichotomy of good and bad things, that both money, the perspective of money being either good or bad. And I think it's a disservice to themselves, the hippie movement, and kind of the distaste for money and financial gain. Money is a human creation, and it is a tool. It's very indifferent. It is neither good or bad. It's a form of energy, as I see it, and it is the more comfortable we can become dealing with and distributing that energy, the more fluent and the more of service we can be to our common goal, which is definitely to find kind of harmony and yeah. So at least that's for me a big working thing to perceive money. Just it's a tool, it's a human. Same with systems. I mean, these systems are made by humans, and of course we can change them because they're human creations.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for that, Daniel. And it's one of the reasons why part of my big investment of time at the moment is working with some key allies to develop to develop an investment fund that will be attractive to the stewards and holders of financial capital, in particular the investment funds that will need to be paying our pension in 20, 30, 40 years' time, and who therefore have a definite need to invest that money in businesses that will be able to deliver return on investment in 10, 20, 30 years' time, which any business that is trashing the planet today is unlikely to be able to do. And I think, if I remember correctly, the number is something like $46 trillion in stranded assets, at least. So that's one big focus. And as you were saying, John, it's about making sure that we look like a dragon, so that, or like a serious investor at that point.
Can I just say, just answering, because I think what Daniel said is, it makes it more precise. It's more about the gratification than it is about the money. I think that's what came through to me from what we were talking about when we were talking in the group, was what's in it for me, which is a gratification thing, whether it be money or whatever. So what I'm looking for is people to engage with it with the same level of excitement they seem to engage with money with at the moment. So that's good. So thank you, Daniel, for
absolutely.
So Jack and I plan to continue running this group once a month. And next time, the theme that we are thinking of focusing on is, why do most statistically trained people make bad investment decisions? And what can you do instead to take good decisions? And that's covered in section 6.4. So please take a look at that. That will be on March the 30th, same time as this program. You can find the sign up point over there. And if you want to know more about this, well, the way that we put food on the table for ourselves and a roof over our head is through our workshops, which span a wide range, both workshops for individuals on how to develop new lenses to look at the world through, how to transform yourself so that you're able to embrace new ways of working, as well as workshops and courses on how to set up a FairShares Commons company and a range of others. So please do take a look there. Also really important, we've written this book with the idea that it will be helpful to lots of people. So the more people know about this book and read it, the better. So please do put a book review online. Amazon, for example, if you're a regular customer, you can put a review there, even if you haven't bought the book from them. Share it widely. Watch and share our other videos and podcasts. And in particular, for somebody who either has a very limited amount of money, or people who want to taste it first before they buy it, remember the PDF of our book is available to download for free from our website up there. So, please do share it with everybody. And if you are willing to support Jack and myself in getting the next level of work done and getting the marketing going and everything, we would be enormously grateful for any sponsorship you can give us. So we are bang on the 1:30 point. I will, in a moment after Jack has spoken, we'll bring this to a formal end, but I'll stay online afterwards for any general questions and chatting. Jack, some last words from you.
Absolutely, and my last words too have to be brief, and the reason why I do have to teach, but I would just like to mention that writing the book was very, very exciting for both of us. It was arduous, but it was very exciting, and then getting the book published was also very exciting. But then meeting all of you and participating with you, I think, is even more exciting. It just makes me very emotional, but it's really nice just reaching out with all of you, and I really, really enjoyed meeting you, and I just hope to keep it up. And I really appreciate your being with us, and it is very, very exciting for us to be with you right now, and I appreciate it. And I love your ideas, all of you. But anyway, I do have to go. I do have to teach. It's 8:30 in the morning or 9:30 in the morning.
Thanks, Jack.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. It's been grand having you all here. And as Jack says, this is why we wrote the book, is this kind of conversation, growing this kind of a movement. Wish you all a fantastic day. Hope to see you all next month, same time, same place. And cheers to everybody. And I'm still around for those who want to chat. So the floor is now open for general chatting.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye-bye, Graham.
Cheers.
Thank you
Everybody
all.
else.
Can I pitch in while
go for it?
Everyone else does. Do I understand from what you said that say the seventh generation from now is not a stakeholder, it's an interest that you ask all stakeholders to take on?
So I like that question. In the way that I load the word stakeholder, the next 7 generations are a stakeholder. The challenge is that they're a stakeholder that is not physically present with a voice. And in that sense, the FairShares Commons requires, through the principles of stewardship, requires that the steward class represents to the best ability they can the interests and needs of have a voice in the meeting. And so the stewards are expected to represent that stakeholder group. That comes in both, explicitly for all stewards, and also in how the stewards are chosen. So, for example, you could say at least 2 of the stewards need to be chosen from organizations that are explicitly mandated to represent nature. You could choose stewards from organizations that are explicitly mandated to represent the next 7 generations. These are all, the FairShares Commons is much like a mixing desk in a music studio. It has lots and lots of different dials that you can dial up or down to suit each specific business. And those are just 2 examples of how the FairShares Commons is designed to bring in and give voice even to abstract types of stakeholders that are inherently voiceless because they haven't been born yet or because they are plants and rocks.
So
Thanks.
actually going off of that, Graham, besides the 4 main categories of stakeholders that you proposed, do you use any specific stakeholder framework or typology, or perhaps the idea of stakeholder guilds in order to figure out and boil down all potential stakeholders? Or is it sort of like a more intuitive process for you that you just are able to pick them out?
I love your question, Telu. So starting on the 10th, we're running the first course and workshop on building a FairShares Commons company. And the backbone of that is our FairShares Commons canvas. And a central part of what we go through there is really understanding what are all of the capitals that your operations will be touching, who are the representatives of those capitals, and then working through the process of what are the types of stakeholder categories that you need to have to represent those capitals and stakeholders effectively. And the guiding line is you need to have enough different stakeholder categories to do a decent job of it, and as few as possible so you don't get overwhelmed with complexity. And that often ends up at somewhere between 4 and 7 stakeholder categories. And for instance, one of the companies that we incorporated a couple of years ago, two of the categories we decided on was individual producer consumers and business producer consumers. It's in essence a membership organization focused on consciousness raising activities. And so we recognize that all of the people who engage are at least consumers, but most of them will also be producers. And so instead of having a customer segment and a supplier segment and things like that, we decided, no, we want everybody to be a prosumer, a producer consumer. And the only relevant distinction is whether you're doing this as an individual in your spare time or as a professional business to earn money. We have, for example, sometimes we have both the investor and a donor stakeholder category. The donors need to be able to put money in and get the tax benefits of a donation, which means that they cannot get any benefit from it. So all they need is some kind of voting engagement, but they absolutely can't have any return on investment. Whereas the investors are putting money in to get money back. Yeah. So it's, as I say, it's a mixing desk in a music studio, and it's not just a preset set of dials that you can turn up or down. You have the flexibility to add any dials you want, whatever frequency you need in your mixing desk, put it in.
That makes sense. And so my follow-up question would be then, you formed a company or you're assessing a company and you identify the working capitals, but you have trouble finding representatives for those capitals. So for example, I don't know, you're working with a bakery and one person working in that bakery is an environmental activist, but nobody in that bakery, nor in the downstream or in the upstream, is, say, like an environmental scientist or something. So then how do you represent, in this specific case, natural capital?
Excellent question. The standard, let's say the simplest approach is in the FairShares Commons, there's always the category of steward. And stewards are primarily externals. In the traditional world, you might think of them as non-executive directors. So the route that we propose here is that you allocate at least one steward as representative of the critical capitals and stakeholder groups, and that the principles of stewardship are clearly defined in a way that gives you what you need. For instance, what we strongly recommend is that one of the stewards is a representative from Evolute 6, or what we will form the Evolute 6 Foundation. And that steward is there to fully represent the integrity of the FairShares Commons itself, and to protect against either self-centered decisions that would weaken the commons, that other people might not recognize that this decision is going to put the whole business onto the slippery slope down into becoming a normal company. You can very easily, for example, there's a company in the UK, they're developing hydrogen-powered cars, and they have appointed, with 1/6 of the voting power in the general meeting, organizations to represent the needs of the planet, like WWF, Greenpeace, etc. So that's the proposed route for doing that.
That makes very much sense. Thank you very much.
Okay. Paolo, I think I saw your hand up a moment ago, but I've seen it come down again.
I would like to just ask a question. I am fascinated by the definition and the concept of ecosystems and organization ecosystems. I'm actually doing a PhD, and that's one of the concepts I want to bring in. I just wanted you to say something about ecosystems and how can we bring this message for a broader audience.
Right. One of my favorite themes. So, by the way, do connect with me, everybody on LinkedIn and so on. My starting point from an ecosystem is we can have two types of ecosystems in business and in nature. We can have a shallow ecosystem, which is what is normally thought of as an ecosystem in business, which is just companies that trade with each other. Or we can have a deep ecosystem, which is how nature builds its ecosystems. And in a deep ecosystem, the two key characteristics is that you have shared DNA and common metabolic pathways. This is what the FairShares Commons is designed to deliver. Now, I'm going to jump up to one of my other slides. So this is what we were talking about in the first launch. For a circular economy to really work, it needs to be structured as a deep ecosystem. What that means is if these three companies in this circle are FairShares Commons Incorporated, then each company has governance rights in each other because they're all built as FairShares Commons with shared DNA. And each company shares in the surplus wealth generated across all of the capitals of each other. And this now means that these companies form a deep ecosystem. The health of each one of them depends on the health of the entire ecosystem. If any of them tries to get more money, in other words, they try to get fatter at the expense of the other companies in the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem will become less healthy, and therefore each of the companies will become less healthy. The company that tried to get fatter at the expense of the others will itself therefore become less healthy and will end up starving to death because the other companies aren't there. So this is really how the FairShares Commons enables such ecosystems to develop from a bottom-up perspective. The ecosystem grows the way nature grows ecosystems, rather than being created top-down through regulation, government policy, or anything like that. Does that address your question, Paolo? Excellent. And I'd love to, I think the research you're doing is spot on, because what we need more than anything else now is as much hard data as possible to prove to people that this way of going about business works, that it can deliver everything that we need delivered. So love your work. Do stay in contact as your work progresses. Eileen, this is horribly early in the morning for you in Australia. I am deeply impressed that you are still awake, and not just awake, you have a smile and energy.
Actually, it's the same for Paolo, because we're both in Sydney. So actually, we're both involved in the same project at the Narara Eco Village, which I think you know about, Graham, from some people that did the sociocracy course. I've got a question. I'm also fascinated by the ecosystem. I think we could model something quite nice for you using FairShares at the Eco Village. So I think we should stay in touch. Now, in your book, you talk about the stewards not getting, intentionally not getting a share of the profits or of investor shares. So they don't, you can pay them something like an honorarium for participating in meetings, but you say no, because that keeps them honest almost. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes, absolutely correct. it's something it's not something I would mandate. You know, if in a certain situation the founders of a business say, no, we want the stewards to have a share of surplus or a share of the capital gain, I'm cool with that. But I do strongly encourage, even if the stewards, the individuals that you appoint to a stewardship role now have the kind of integrity you need, we should build for the next 7 generations and build in the appropriate immune system so that if a parasite gets in, the organization does not immediately collapse because it has no immune system against parasites or viruses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, gotcha. Thank you. Another question. The founder group that I noticed in your book, you haven't in the two tables. What's your feeling about having a founder group or co-founder group?
Yes. So in the level 4 FairShares company, there's the option of having a founder stakeholder class or a steward stakeholder class. My concern with having the founder class in there, first of all, when the founders leave the company, either because they leave or they pass away and their estate inherits, etc., the founder shares disappear. And that then means that there is nobody who has the formal mandate to protect the integrity of the company, the integrity of the spirit. And so that's what led me to say, no, we need to have a steward class instead of the founder class, something that continues, that is designed for the entire life of the organization. Most likely, perhaps up to half of the stewards might be the co-founders at the beginning. But they're there as stewards, not as founders. And in particular, that means that you have the power, if they are no longer acting according to the principles of stewardship, they can be removed.
Okay, thank you. Yep, you've given me some ideas. Thank you.
Grand. John, I see a paw in the air from you as well.
Yeah, it was just a really quick point this time, which is I spent about 10 or 15 minutes ruminating on John's question of what is gratifying for people, or what is as gratifying for people as money. And I think Anna actually hit the nail on the head straight away, pretty much. When
John, you've gone on to mute. John, you're on mute.
Forgive me. Yeah. So I think Anna hit the nail on the head pretty much when she said what she said, but I've still kept ruminating on it. And so what I want to say is, what is as gratifying for people as money? I think it's this. I think it's the legacy of freedom to release creativity and improvement and thriving. The legacy of freedom to release creativity and improvement and thriving. So imagine you could find that in your own life, and then you could pass that down to your own generations. You could pass that across to society, to people around you. You could infuse that into education. I reckon that could be as gratifying as money for the right kind of people.
I'll pick up on that, because it's a really good point, and it's absolutely true. Looking through that lens, where it breaks down, for example, is what would be gratifying to a pension fund, not a human being, but a pension fund that is accountable for ensuring that in 10, 20, 50 years' time, you as a pensioner have what you need to have food on the table, a roof over your head, etc. And so whatever we're offering needs to be gratifying across the spectrum of needs and across all scales, from individual human beings through to the entire planet, where pension funds are sitting somewhere in the middle. And that's what the FairShares Commons is really designed to do, is to be able to meet across all scales, all types of capitals and currencies. Yeah, and even just at our scale, certainly at least in the way the economy is running at the moment, for me to put food on the table and a roof over the head with the kind of lifestyle I would like to be living, there are things that I can do without money. And as we develop complementary currencies, there's more that we will not need money for, but there'll always be a basis that we'll need money for. So it really is about finding a way that is fully inclusive, that is not excluding something. So I see a few more hands up, so I'll go Talu next and then John.
Thank you, Graham. So first, I also want to add something to your answer regarding the ecosystem, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm also living in a permaculture farm, so it's hard for me to not draw parallels between the way that nature actually operates and the way that businesses, in my view, should operate. And so when you look at the upstream, the direct operations, and the downstream, this is the whole value chain, right? So there are key business activities there that are similar to what an ecosystem is, key organisms. And around that, you find generally, say, a tree, an apple tree or something, a guild of organisms that exists around it, and that whose purpose there is to aid and mutually co-evolve to thrive and survive. So that's what I think is something like very important in the way that we are also looking at stakeholders, because if we are able to, put stakeholders in or categorize stakeholders in specific guilds, then we are identifying them based on their role and their specific relationships that they have between each others and how they are able to mutually co-evolve and benefit each other. So that's like also one piece of thought that has also helped me a lot in identifying how different stakeholders group can and perhaps interact with each other in better ways. If you have a direct response to that, go ahead. Otherwise, I do have a question.
I'll put in a short response and then come to your question. So you're absolutely spot on. There's some fascinating research that's emerged over the past couple of decades on how evolution actually works, which reinforces that what we've known for a long time, that bees, for example, evolution works at the level of the hive, not at the level of the individual bee. And that's also true if you put rabbits together. Evolution actually works at the level of the entire rabbit colony, not the individual rabbits. And that's just within one species. And it's even more true, as you're saying, and this is what the FairShares Commons is there to do. If the entire value chain up and down the supply chain, if they're all FairShares Commons incorporated, then it's like nature. We're in the maximum position to build a relationship-based economy rather than a simplistic transactional economy, where the relatedness between all of the different, I'll use the word stakeholders because I've not found a better word, all of the different stakeholders, the actual relatedness that is there in how they interact is now represented in governance and wealth share. And so governance and wealth share can now fully take into account the full ecosystem. And so the evolutionary forces that enable the system to continue to adapt to changing contexts can work effectively. Yeah. And that, by the way, that was the essence of what Darwin was saying. It's survival of the organism that is best fitted to the niche they're in, and therefore that can evolve faster than their niche is changing, that survives, which has nothing to do with strength or whatever. You had a question, Tello, and then we'll move to John.
So I actually wanted to get some comments on what Evolute 6 is actually doing, and what is their way moving forward. And a side question to that is, do you have any intentions to sort of keep the group that comes to your webinars as a cohesive group, and perhaps, you know, start an enterprise with that?
Oh, I love your questions. And John and Robert, who have been part of the first community of practice for 12 months now as we were writing the book. So the first answer is, you know, yes, we absolutely intend to keep this community growing. We want this community to grow. As soon as we're in a position to do it, we would like to have somebody on board and in a paid role of community curation. And we would love it if somebody over the coming months can emerge as a volunteer until we're in a position for this to become a paid role. You know, with this book club emerging, for example, it would be superb if somebody as a community curator could at least facilitate the connections between the different book clubs. These are things that, in my experience, they need a host, a curator, to really enable them to happen well. In terms of what Evolute 6 does, so our core product is the entire spectrum around, I'll start with the word education. So we're selling a range, you know, and education doesn't do justice to what it's about, but let's take that as a placeholder word, is education around the whole spectrum of what's covered in the book. You know, and in particular, the 3 axes that I have over here of what is the individual interactivity and individual human development in the organization as part of work. How is work organized, the roles, the tasks, and how is the company incorporated? So our business plan is centered around we're making the money we need and doing everything else we're doing to multiply the other capitals, first of all, by selling products spanning those 3 dimensions. And that means courses on what do you need to know to really create a FairShares Commons company? Or at least what do you need to know so that you can go and talk to a lawyer and teach the lawyer what the lawyer needs to know to do the job? How do you develop yourself? How do you create a company that is fully developmental? For people who have read Frederick Laloux's book, in essence, the core product of Evolute 6 is a complete set of what do you need to build a teal company. That's at the heart of what we offer. And our big focus is our Startup University, which is a 3-month program for individuals who want to work in startups on this basis to learn how to do it, and through a design thinking process to create the startup that fits them, followed by a 6-month accelerator, which is an integration of both traditional accelerator programs as well as deepening along these 3 axes. And we're building a network of investors who get what we're talking about and are willing to put money behind this kind of company, with the plan that in 18 months to 2 years, we'll roll up the first wave of investments into an investment vehicle. I'll call it a fund, but it's nothing like any fund you've seen before. It's a FairShares Commons fund. And that fund will then become the seed or pre-seed source of investment for the FairShares Commons companies. So that's the plan, the range of what we're up to, from what we're doing now to keep us going and build revenue through to where we're heading in the longer term. And where is it? So And the workshops and courses we're currently offering are all on that website over there under the workshops heading.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That's fantastic to hear. I have to get going now, but I'm very grateful for everything that you've done. Your work is amazing. You're definitely one of my heroes, so I really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Excellent. Thank you, Teru. Cheers. John.
I'm not sure if I can remember what I was going to say now. I think it was something about, it was an answer to John's point, which was, yeah, I think something about getting alongside people is really important. And it's being able to, it's sort of bringing the joy to them so they see and feel the gratification, because actually, I mean, the job I do is I'm in the probation service, and I do unpaid work when people have to do unpaid work. And one of my first things was, can I get a group of people who have no reason to be there, have no desire to be there, and have no interest in actually fulfilling the work, to actually enjoy working? And you can, of course you can, because it's not about money. It's not about any of that stuff. It's just about how do people feel when they're working together in a group and things like that. And my best feedback was, God, bloody hell, John, I work harder for you than I ever work for the guy I'm working for. I'm like, okay, thank you. I'll take that testimonial and walk with it. So it's what you're saying there. But it's how do you spread that? You can't spread that through a PowerPoint. You know, it's getting alongside people. And I was going to say, Graham, about the pensions, if we can persuade the pension companies, something along the lines of, if you set up these communities where people are living in, you won't have to pay people so much big pensions, because people will be looking after each other at that point. And you won't need to have the financial capital, because you'll have built the social and the human capital. That means, so I think that's something, there's something about that as well.
Yes, I very much agree with you there. There is one investment fund in the UK, and their name, I just can't bring their name to mind, but they invested in the regeneration around St. Pancras King's Cross station. And a core part of their investment thesis was exactly, how do we create a vibrant community? Because if we have a vibrant community, the financial return on investment will be at least as good, will have lower risk, etc., etc. So there are a few who are starting to get to a point where you can engage with them at that level. The challenge is that the whole world of investment is so highly regulated to try and prevent bad things from happening, that actually the people that we might want to talk to are almost all so constrained by regulation and protecting the money that they are holding in trust for the members, that kind of conversation can only begin a few years down the line, once you've passed through the gates of regulation and, let's say, the classic financial sector. So it's absolutely imperative, it's absolutely vital to get to that point, that we tick all of the boxes at this point.
Yeah, no, I see that, because I mean, they're so terrified that someone would have a corrupt relationship that they close all relationship down.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, you know, I was in conversation with one of the people who's working with us around this whole theme, and we were chatting about how at home somebody might be completely getting everything around next generations, the environment, etc. But as soon as they put their fund management hat on, they have to think and act in a certain way. Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Eileen, you look as if you might be wanting to say something.
Yes, I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. I'm getting very sleepy now, so I better go and go to bed. But I look forward to the next one. Graham, is this the only time? I suppose you're trying to accommodate so many geographical locations.
It's a good point. Next month, we're going to be doing it this time, but I am very aware of the needs of people in New Zealand, Australia, and that part of the world. And we do plan to run perhaps a third or a quarter of the events in the morning in Europe, so that you can join at a humane hour, and then Jack has to wake up really early in the morning in the US.
Thank you. Okay, so I leave you. Brilliant. I really enjoyed it, and I did stay awake. So, but thank you very, very much for your work, and we'll keep in touch, hopefully.
Please do. And please do recommend the book to everybody who might want to read it.
I am. The whole Eco Village, I'm recommending it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Good night.
Nicholas.
Yes.
I think I'm being joined.
Yeah, I also have to go, but first, before leaving the boat, I've enjoyed the last couple of hours journey. Got more inspired in 2 hours than in a week, to be honest. So thanks for this, Graham. We met. I don't know why. Now I understand why, but we met in a random entrepreneurs meeting. You remember it?
Yes, Uni One, where you spoke.
I don't speak. I don't believe anymore in coincidences. I just the flow connected us and allowed me to listen to all of you and all of us today. So looking forward to the next meeting, because I really want to make these kind of meetings and chats part of my routine, because it feeds me as a human being. So thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicholas. It was grand having you here, and hope to see you same time, same place on the 30th of March.
Beauty. I'll write it down straight away.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Nicholas. Bye.
Bye.
Right.
I think that's my attention span gone.
Your attention span has been spanned to distraction.
Yeah.
You're on your way, Robert.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Graham, thank you. Are we meeting tonight or not? I can't remember. Are we?
I'm thinking no. It's yeah. It's been great having you here. Hope to see you next month.
Yeah, that was my question too, Graham. Thank you. Really good meeting.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye.
I also send our apologies. Should have liked to be.
Brilliant, Graham. Thank you. Wonderful. Really fun.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. See you next week.